when I started doing any kind of art, it was an illustration, because what I started doing was I went down to during the revolution, I would go down and sketch live the protests and all that kind of stuff. And so my stuff is more like illustration based. And then I actually had another artist.
I want to stand over here.
Care enough that he started pushing me, and he was just like, what is this? He's from Spain. And he's like, what is this? He's like, this is not painting. You need to paint. And he's like very like passionate. He's like, you need to be like, boom, it's painting. This is not painting. What you're doing is not painting. This, boom, this is painting. You get the emotion, And he was just like, you need to push this way. So I listened to him, and that's why I paint now. It's before I just drew.
Yeah.
All right. My name is Brady Black.
What is this called? Your zipper's down?
Yep.
All right, can you tell us why you chose that title?
Yeah, I called it Your Zipper is Down because of where it's placed is at the bottom of a stairwell. And so when you turn the stairwell, you've got these huge children staring at you. Behind it so their eyes would follow you. And so when you come down, the first, you get this girl on the left and she's staring directly at you. And then you're like, oh. And then this other girl, then as you come down, you can see her and she's got, her eyes on you. And then if you keep going further down, you're able to get past the air duct and then you get his face at you. And so it's the idea of just kind of experiencing some childlike insecurity, where, as a kid, we all were like, oh my gosh, everybody's looking at you. And I wanted you to kind of have a little bit of that feeling of like everybody's looking at you, so you're to be a little bit on your heels, but the people who are making you on your heels are the kids. And so a little bit of a role reversal, a little bit of a power swap. I made them huge, because I make stuff huge, but I wanted it to be like, whoa, I would love it to be a little bit uncomfortable, but not so in your face. And so the kind of your zipper is down, it's like, that's that feeling when you walk into a room and you're like, oh crap, my zipper is down, everybody's looking at me. It's like, and so just a kind of a play on that childlike insecurity, but then trying to be a little bit of a role reversal, but with a little bit of a wink, but not too nasty.
Nice. Okay.
I'm at Basecamp Studios because Nick, the founder, contacted me because he had seen some of the street art that I was doing. I'm trying to start figuring out where I can carve out my spots in Seattle to be able to join the conversation. But I'm new, and so I'm trying to figure out how do I do that in a way that is respectful to the streets, respectful to Seattle. As like, I'm not yet a Seattleite. Hopefully, I'm getting my license, but so I'm not there. I'm not there yet, and so trying to figure out how to do that. And Nick contacted me and said, hey, would you come check out this space? I don't normally do stuff indoors unless it's like a bombed out place, but this place felt at home. It felt like,
it was a bombed out.
I was like, this place looks right. Like, this is where I hang out. And no offense to Basecamp Studios downstairs, but the art that I make is supposed to be at a place specifically, so I want it to be place informed, place dependent. And so the position of it being in the bottom of the stairs was able to interact with you, the viewer, and so this is why I'm a disaster. I have a very difficult time with studio art because it doesn't exist in a place. It's like, like I could just do it anywhere, and so I get confused because I don't have the restrictions that I have in, like this is a glass wall, so it's like
all these opaque colors.
Yeah, it's like this is a glass wall, and so like for me to be able to make this in the glass wall, it's like I had to make considerations. This kid couldn't be here, right? Because there's a limitation of this, so he affects the composition. If he's affected by the composition, then the whole composition has to be affected. And so these kinds of puzzles and how I want the viewer to experience it is all part of how I work, and so that doesn't always translate in like a studio environment. However, at Basecamp Studios, working here, it did, because it was like, there were all kinds of problems I had to get around. It was involving the viewer in a descending the stairwell kind of deal, and so it fit my scene, and so I was happy to work with them. Beirut, we originally went to Beirut about 8 years ago to start a school for children who had never had the opportunity to go to school, so they were living on the streets, working in the garbage, and abandoned generally by their families or with severe abuse. And so we started a school for them, teaching them English, Arabic, numeracy, to be able to try to give them a leg up in the world, because they had nothing. And these were, some of these kids were 17 years old, didn't know how to hold a pencil. But really what we were doing is we were using academics as a vehicle to help teach them emotional regulation, because there's a world where you could be illiterate and still have a life, through honorable work and things like this. But there is not, if you couldn't control yourself, or if you weren't able to manage your emotions, then you wouldn't be able to even have that. And so we used the education as a vehicle to teach them how to try to heal and begin to understand their emotions, to be able to get along more effectively in society. So that's what we were in Beirut doing. That program got closed, a much longer story. And while we didn't leave when our project ended, because we were adopting one of those kids from the streets, and he didn't have any papers or anything. And so we were stuck in Beirut for about 2.5 years after the project ended. And surprisingly, that didn't put me in this great mental space. And so I had to, I was kind of going crazy. And so I started drawing on the walls of the city, and just trying to get better. So art ultimately helped me with my mental place. I got really involved with the revolution that was going on there, and the revolution started, and so I started drawing, going down to the protests and getting shot at and stuff like that. But I would draw the revolution live and give those images to the supporters of the revolution. So I was going down there kind of as a documentary illustrator, and so I was surrounded by photojournalists with flak jackets and from CNN and BBC, and I'm drawing with the gas mask getting shot at, and they're like, "What the hell are you doing?" It's like, I don't really know. So I kept doing that, and so that was the thing that started helping me, being involved in that. And then from there, I met a gallery that said, "Hey, well, what if you drew on the walls?" And I was like, "That sounds crazy, I'll try it." And I fell in love with it, and that's how I started doing street art. And in the end, me going crazy and trying to get arrested ultimately improved my mental state, and was able to then see the value of street art and the value of public art and how that can work. And then started working with other disadvantaged populations, trying to do the same thing.
You were talking more about the children that you run the streets with, and working on murals with them. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so what happened, my entire experience in Beirut was working in a school for kids from the street. And so when that closed, I just went to the streets, because I already know these kids. And so in Lebanon, these kids are treated as less than dogs and cats. They'll leave food out for cats. They won't leave food out for these kids. And so, but I knew these kids. And so I would just go down on the streets, and I just started coloring with them. And we would, I'd gather a whole group of these kids together. I'd bring them lunch, and then we would just color. And, and then they called me Amu Fanan, which means uncle artist. And so I would come down the streets, and all these kids just come flock, and swarm you. And it's like, what are we doing today? Well, we're drawing. And then we would make sculptures with the trash, and we would just start doing this kind of stuff. And then in Beirut, there's a lot of bombed out buildings and abandoned structures. And so we turned one of those into kind of our little clubhouse, where I had 25, boys who work in the trash and on the streets, and we would just have lunch. I made them coloring books that are around their own life, so it's not like you're coloring princess castles or whatever. It's we were coloring pictures of dumpsters and pictures of the streets, because I'm hey, it's respectable what you guys are doing. You guys are working in trash, selling it. It's that's a job. That's respectable. It's honorable. And it's and I respect you. And it's let's color that, because there's no shame in this. And so we would color and that, and then I started painting huge portraits of them on these walls, and then teaching them how to do their own murals. And so I would give them outlines because they didn't know how to draw. Most of them didn't know how to write their name. And so I'd show them how to write their name, and I'd give them spray cans, and we just write their names over and over and over again all over the wall, and then we would paint on top of that, use that as like a textural background, and just giving them simple like geometric lines, a lot of graphic stuff, to be able to say, here, do this line, do it over and over again all across this wall. And then when it's done, they're like, whoa, this looks so cool. And like, it ends up looking cool. Yeah. But on top of that, I would paint their portraits. And so talking with them about why like this is a small one, so it's like I would paint them 20 feet tall, and it's like the reason I'm painting you 20 feet tall is because this is who you are. You are this valuable. It's like you exist and you take up this much space, more space than the politicians, more space than the beautiful models on the billboard. So you're bigger than both of them, and these kids would just be like, what, paint me next, paint me next. So I had like this whole, I would just paint these kids for that, to respect them, and then also to challenge the community, because the Lebanese community is like, why are you painting these street kids? And I'm like, exactly that, because you don't believe that they should be painted. You don't believe in them. You give them no time and no dignity. And so in one sense, it's an antagonism towards one group of people while trying to uplift and honor another group of people. And I ended up finding that kind of be my space, my little niche of trying to find people and empower them, while also letting the rest of the community be antagonized, to be honest.
Yeah, you also said, the community comes out for you, and that, like, especially when like the military came out.
It's like, I would be painting on the streets, and these are kids who work on the streets, and so I'd paint that kid live, like he's there, and like at the same time, and these, and the military would show up, and they're like, what are you doing? And and this kind of stuff. And then I'd been out there for days doing it, and the community knew what I was doing, and so the community would come and defend me. Like, I was stupid, so I would try to like fight back, and the community's just like, no, Habibi, no, and then they would fight for it, because like I was an idiot, like I was just gonna be like, I'm hot
American,
and I'm just like, and they're like, we don't need a white American doing this. Be quiet. We will do the fighting for you. And so and it was a beautiful thing. It was humble for me to be like, you don't get to defend yourself because you can't. Mm-hmm. We will defend you, because we actually, and in the end, it was humbling and also very encouraging to me that the community was behind it. And so, there's a lot of these projects would ultimately be defended by the communities.
Well, one I'm very inspired by is the one with the paper airplanes. The reason why I'm inspired by it is because my daughter, she's 7 years old. I had an Arabic friend come over, and he made her a paper airplane. And we were about, I think he was maybe 22 at the time. Mm-hmm. Like, now he's probably like 24. But all his life, he'd always see airplanes coming like across, and it wasn't a good thing. It was like they're bringing bombs, they're bringing all these things. So all he knew was chaos. And so the airplane was kind of like a symbolism to him. What could you say about putting airplanes, paper airplanes, in your
and for me, that isn't like, for me, my doing that was more of like adding a level of whimsy, adding a level of like childlike dream, whimsy, imagination. And that's because like the airplanes for me, like when I first came to Seattle, I kept ducking when planes would land, because like I was underneath the same like F-16s from Israel as well, and like thinking we were about to get bombed, and so he has probably a stronger association in that than I do, and so for me, I was using those planes, and like the bright colors and whatnot to bring like a sense of levity, a sense of, Joy was this kid who's just kind of like leaning back and just kind of daydreaming, with these kinds of ideas. So hopefully it reads that way. It's crazy. It's a different scene, and commercial planes flying over, I'll still duck, and the day, not the day, when we came back from Beirut, 3 days beforehand, there was an Israeli plane that flew so low over Beirut, and I was out painting, and it flew and it turned right in front of me, and I could see the color of the pilot's helmet, and everyone around me was on the ground. they just dropped on the ground. They all thought we were about to die.
Yeah.
You know, I just wasn't smart enough to duck. I was just like, well, you know, and so, but it's like, that's what everybody lives. And it's like, that was this summer. And so the paintings that I was doing is like, it's bringing, this is why I use these colors, because in Lebanon, they do not let you use muted, normal, like Pottery Barn palette. That is not going to be accepted. You have to use bright colors, because they're like, look at where we freaking live, man. Don't you come in here with your freaking muted palette. You know, they're like, you come in with this, because like, if I'm gonna let you paint on the street, you better improve my situation. Mm-hmm. You know, and so it was like, you don't get to use American nice palettes. You have to use Lebanese palettes. Because like before this, I never even used color. I've never used color. I always just use color in black, or I draw black and white. But the Lebanese are like, no, we will not be letting you draw in black and white. You draw in
That's
color.
Wonderful. They enhanced your craft by.
They absolutely did. Yeah, they wouldn't let me do it, because they're just like, you know, how dare you come into my street and what did you add? Mm-hmm. And for the Lebanese, the brightness, extremely loud, and it's a loud culture. So it's a very warm culture. So it's like, it's loud, it's boisterous, you know, in voice and in music and in actions, and you know, and color. And so you as a guest in that country, there were some rules you need to follow, and one of them is like, don't freaking bring your damn Pottery Barn crap here with your, you know, your slate blue bullshit. All right. August 2020, there was an enormous explosion in Beirut. They call it the Beirut Blast. It was the third largest explosion ever in the planet that wasn't nuclear. And so it destroyed the whole city. It was like a small nuclear bomb went off. It wasn't nuclear, but had that kind of power, explosion power. And so it destroyed huge sections of the city. Like there was no glass in the whole city. I mean, it was insane. A lot of people died. And they did the removal of spraying these kids' faces off and whatnot, and the whole Beirut community is just up in arms, and it got significant more attention being destroyed than it did being installed, you know, and through that, the darkness and the injustice that was being physically displayed ultimately highlighted the very thing that we weren't able to say out loud. So the government basically did the art. We just gave them the canvas, and it's like, you guys did it. Like, you guys said it. Like, we gave you an opportunity. We set y'all up, and y'all did the thing we thought you'd do. You needed some better PR, you know. So wow. Yeah, you know. So now that happened 2 days ago, and so it's really it's adding to the conversation of difficulty in Lebanon. They were, you know, their job was to like a group of older Lebanese women their job was to defend us against the army. But if they removed it right then, it wouldn't have been anything, right? Mm-hmm. But they allowed it to be up because they recognized what it was. So they allowed it to be up. The second that they allowed it to be up, we knew that the moment someday you're gonna have to take it down. Mm-hmm. That moment you take it down is gonna be a mess. And because now you're taking it down is a speech act. Your removal is a communication act. And unless it's done in a real intentional way, like with, you know, maybe the construction walls removed, which they weren't, you're just removing them. The construction walls are still there. And I'm just like, bro, and they did it in the middle of protests, in the middle of it, like, and I'm like, man, you guys just walked right into that trap. Yeah. It was beautiful. And so as much as I grieve with the families as an artist, I'm just in awe of how they just did the very thing that we thought that they would do, and it's being received very clearly.
I just hope more art goes up.
Taking what I learned in Beirut, and I feel like I'm coming to a place that's more difficult and more complicated in a lot of aspects, and that I feel like I learned a lot in Beirut, and I'm not taking that immediately and thinking I can do the same thing. You know, it's like I want my art to change because I'm in a different place, right? You know, I like, and which is hard for me. This is the hardest part for me, is that in Beirut, I knew what I was doing. I felt comfortable. I felt like I had a place, you know, and I knew what I was doing. And I've come to the States, and my art is like, I'm like, it doesn't make sense here to do the same thing, which is right. That's what it should be. Like, art should have a place. And so I'm like, okay, I want to experience and fully let this place make new art. And my art could look different. It could mean something different. It could even be like, maybe it's not as good, you know? And it's like, and I'm like, and I'm trying to let that be real, you know, and not, because otherwise I'm just going to be like a brand. Like, I'm not trying to be a brand wherever I go. I want it to be different wherever I go. And it takes time to learn what it is. And so.
For the youth here who are in street art or just kind of making their own things happen, do you have any advice of how they could get supported and sponsored for public art?
Yeah, I think for the people who want to do it, there's one option, which is the graffiti writing and the tagging, you know, and that's a very different kind of art expression, you know, and those guys aren't asking for my opinion, right? You know, so if that, you know, it's like those guys, I respect what they're doing. They're the ones who started all of this, and so I have a lot to learn and listen from those guys. Those guys generally don't like me, which is I'm okay with. And so the people who are interested in doing stuff, some of the stuff that's more street art based, the advice that I would have with them is that, you know, finding a way to do like some permission based, which sucks, right? But if you can risk trying to find ways to have some of the permission here in the US, then you can do better stuff in terms of more elaborate, you have more time, you know, you're not on the run, you know, trying to do it. I do both. I do permission and non-permission based. The non-permission based, it's like, it's gotta be fast because you're gonna go to jail. I ain't trying to go to jail. You know, and so it's like, if that is part of your thing and not asking permission, then it's like, then that's, you know, then that ultimately affects your art. So you've got to be able to figure out how to do it fast. You've got to be able to figure out how, you know, like where you're going to be able to go that you can get away with this kind of stuff. And so for me, I'm leaning into some of the more permission based, mostly because like I'm an old dude, I've got a family, I ain't trying to go to jail. And I don't have enough money to go to jail. And so to try to get out of jail. And so I'm leaning into the more permission based stuff and working alongside the community, because the community actually does love art, and so finding ways that I can be involved with the community in celebrating art, celebrating some of their conversations, their ideas, you know. And so I do a lot of asking, you know. I see a wall, I like that wall, and I go talk to the business owner, you know, and I'm like, hey, is it cool if I paint on this wall and just not call the cops? You know, and I've been able to get involved in the conversation with the business owners and being, you know, and it's like, and, you know, and for them to go, it's like, actually, like, they're pissed most of the time. The business owners are very, very angry. And I'm like, no, I'm not trying to, like, you know, tell you that you're feeling angry wrong. Like, I understand the graffiti writers, I understand your position, you know, and I'm like, I'm not trying to fix that problem. I'm just trying to do something different, you know. And a lot of times, if people who are interested in doing stuff that like I'm doing, that's been very easily, that conversation has gone really, really well, and it's been able to be really positive with a lot of the business owners and with the, you know, with the community, you know. And but
so
my experience working on the streets in Seattle has been it's very welcoming. You know, like that's one of the things I love about being, you know, doing work on the streets, is that you interact with the public, you interact with the environment, you got people yelling at you, you got people bringing you pizza, you know, and you got guys like mad, you know, and it's like, I loved it all, you know. It's like, had like, you know, long conversation with a guy who was pissed about what I was doing, you know, and very angry. And then like a little while later, some guy brings me pizza because, you know, he loved what I was doing, and I'm like, that's what I want. So it's been really, it's been a joy working on the streets, and so I hope to continue to find my spot, to kind of dig out my own niche, because there's a lot of wonderful art here in Seattle. So I really am trying to find I'm trying to connect with other artists. I'm trying to learn from, how things are going, what's been done, and my place in it. So I'm still very much in the learner phase.
Yeah, and as you said, you were kind of trying to listen to the streets to understand.
Yeah, it's because I'm not trying to piss anybody off, right? I am trying to piss the right people off, but I'm trying to figure out how or what the conversation is going on in the streets, what is going on, and trying to work. I'm trying to work with it and find my spot in it, as opposed to coming in over the top, hopefully, and so I'm learning a lot, because the American context and the American conversation is very different than the Lebanese, Beirut, European context that I've been working in and working with, and so this is all really new, and so hopefully I'm bringing something to the American context that wasn't already there. Either through subject matter, through stylistically, through the technical things I was pushed into in Lebanon and from the European influences. And so hopefully I can add to and participate in the conversation.
How are you going to advocate here on the street, or do you feel there's a need to advocate?
Absolutely. I'm new, right? I've only been in the States like 4 or 5 months, so I recognize that I've got a lot of listening to do. I didn't start doing this in Beirut until for like 6 years, and so hopefully I can start a little sooner than that. But I've got a lot of listening to do. I've got a lot of, and just kind of like, what's going on? Like, there's people here doing stuff, and so I want to listen to them. I want to see what's happening. And for me, I find my space to be most helpful as I support and come in and tell other people's stories. And so I find my most natural way is to listen and help someone else tell their story really, really loud, as opposed to coming in with my own story. My own story, I think, will probably come later. And so it's like, what is the thing to be advocated for? It's like, there's so much going on. In Beirut, it was really easy. It was really in your face, and there's some really in your face stuff here in the States, but there's a lot of them. And so trying to figure out, like, hey, it's probably, I want to just...
Yeah, it's like, what do you want to advocate for today?
Yeah, it's like, here's the phone book of things that people, and it's like, and it's good as well, because there's just like, it's more complicated here. And so I'm taking what I learned in Beirut, and I feel like I'm coming to a place that's more difficult and more complicated in a lot of aspects, and that I feel like I learned a lot in Beirut, and I'm not taking that immediately and thinking I can do the same thing